friends, welcome to Tarunayas. Today we will be discussing editorials from the Hindu and Indian Express of 18th of October 2022. So let's start with the editorial. I have taken this editorial from Indian Express and it is written by C. Raja Mohan and titled Under Beijing's Shadow. You can relate this article with General Studies paper 2, that is the effect of policies and politics of developed and developing countries on India's interest. So if I am to summarize this article in one word, that will be the geopolitical shift, that how the writer specifically has spoken of that how the engagement between USA and China has changed over the period of time and how this geopolitical shift would affect India's interest. So we will try to understand the points or arguments given by the writer. The writer talks about the current scenario that we see, that the relation between USA and China are distorting. However, historically there was no such scenario. So writer talks about how the relationships has evolved over the period of time. The first argument that the writer gives that in the current scenario, that is when the USA has published its national security strategy, and also the 20th Congress of the Chinese Communist Party, which was held recently, and how the Chinese premier, that is Xi Jinping, has reaffirmed that it is going to be the dominant power in Russia and in Asia, and it is going to replace United States of America, and China remains affirms with its strategy, and USA in its national security strategy says that China remains its greatest threat, especially when it comes to the Asia. So let's begin with the evolution of the relationships of China and USA. In the second half of the 19th century, USA started to send its missionaries to China and began to generate empathy for the nation. If we remember that it was during this second half of the 19th century that Japanese imperialism was at its peak. And Japan had incurred in China. It had incurred in China and it reached up to Manchurian plains as well, right? So therefore America and China, they were together countering Japanese imperialism. And during World War II also, Washington backed Chinese nationalists against the Japanese imperialism, if you see here. However, during 1970s also, USA and the Communist China, they came together to counter the Soviet Union. If we remember that during 1970s, Soviet Union, which was under the communist influence that time, had infiltrated into Afghanistan, and in order to counter Russia in Afghanistan, USA had employed its own strategic tactics, and it partnered with China to counter Russia's influence in Afghanistan. Now let's talk about that how in 1980s the relationship emergence was based on economy and technology. However, in the 21st century, some of the people in USA started to raise concern when it comes to China. They started to say that China in the coming years would be greatest threat for America. However, the America still hold on to its soft relationships with the China and started to consider China that it will become a responsible stakeholder in the world order. And as when the China's economy started to grow, it will democratize its society. However, we all know that this did not happen, and as the national security strategy of USA says that China has become the greatest threat for the United States of America. All right. Now in the recently held Chinese Communist Party meeting or conference, in the 20th conference of the CPP, the Xi Jinping, which is a Chinese premier, he has, however, is seen determined and he has absolutely made no efforts in hiding its intention when it comes to the China's new geopolitical ambitions. So Xi Jinping is determined to reshape the Asia and global order, and it continues to pose a strong challenge to United States. During the tenure of Trump, the national security strategy dealing with the challenges posed by the Russia and China Joe Biden's strategy, national security strategy, builds on that, and it identifies that China is the more demanding challenge as compared to Russia. Biden in fact says that the China poses an immediate threat. However, it is only the China which is intending to reshape the political order, and it does have the economic, the diplomatic, military and technological power to advance that objective. All right. Now, when we say economy, then we know that China's economy is very strong, and when it comes to the diplomatic, we know that China employs this wolf warrior technique. All right, although there is no such formal word for China's diplomacy, however, the expert says that the diplomacy that China engages with the rest of the country is that of the wolf warrior diplomacy. That means it poses a strong stance in front of the country so as to achieve its objectives. All right, we know that PLA has grown even faster, the People Liberation Army of China. So it does have the military power and does have the technological power. So in further in this article, the writer talks about various dimensions of this new unfoldings that is seen in USA and China's relationship, and how it is going to reshape the global order, specifically the order in Asia, in which India is being considered as one of the major players, or you can say India's own concern and India's own ambition to emerge as the regional security provider and regional power. Now, the new contest that is unfolding between China and USA, it will be the principal factor in determining the international relation of Asia and Indo-Pacific. And we know that in Indo-Pacific, India considered itself as the lone power. All right. Now let us look at the various dimensions of the Sino-USA conflict. The first dimension is the ideological dimension. All right, it was said by the Francis Fukuyama after the end of the Cold War that the ideology has ended. That means he proclaimed the end of ideology. But we'll not go into the end of ideology debate, but we will talk about that how this ideology becomes one of the dimension of the Sino-USA conflict. The ideologies are the autocracies and democracy. USA was for democracy. However, the China says that it has got its own model of governing the nation, despite the fact that it is autocratic in nature and does have the rule of communist power for more than decades. It does recognize that it has established a new order of governing structure. So therefore, there is an ideological debate between USA and China, and that is that of the autocracies and democracies. However, recently in the national security strategy of USA, it says that it is not only going to engage with the democratic country, but it is also going to engage with the non-democratic countries if and when needed. The second dimension is the trade and the technological dimension. Now, if I talk about the strategy of the China when it comes to trade and technology, then it employs dual circulation strategy. The first thing, that China is becoming more protected. It is following the tactics of protectionism. That means it does not allow any of the Western countries, firms and business establishment in its own country. However, it does want to expand its own economy by exporting and making the world dependent on its supply chain, as it was seen during the COVID-19 pandemic. So therefore, this is the dual tactic, that it does not want the foreign goods and services to be imported in its territory. However, it does want the world to have export from China. So this is dual circulation strategy, right? So it wants to be independent, but it wants the world to be dependent on its supply chain. All right. The USA talks about that how it wants to go beyond the free trade agreement, beyond the traditional free trade agreement. For example, recently, USA President Joe Biden spoke of this Indo-Pacific Forum, I guess. Indo-Pacific Forum was there, which is IPPF, something like this. And Joe Biden spoke of that how it is going to be beyond the traditional FTA. There will be no liability, no foundations, etc., etc. But this forum was suggested recently, so you can go and look how this forum is going to reshape world order, and whether it will be of any significant or not, etc., etc. The third dimension is the future alliances in Asia. Now, China focuses on building military and economy, but like I said, the USA will be more focused on building alliances, even if it is with the autocratic nation. But if we look at the USA's condition or USA's stake in in Asia, then we have to keep in mind two very important things. The first that USA left Afghanistan after 20 years of war. It left Afghanistan. And the second point, it though does not have the intention to leave West Asia, but it will have to leave West Asia ultimately, considering the geopolitical scenario of West Asia and its relation with other countries. All right. The fourth point that is to be noted is that how the USA will be building alliance with Japan. All right. So USA would consider India and Japan as its two allies in Indo-Pacific region to counter China. Now, when we speak of all this scenario and we talk about how this is going to impact or affect India's policy, then we will have to look at that how India and China's relationship has evolved over the year, and what India demands and how India needs to tackle when it comes to China. Because China is immediate bordering nation of India, and China is not an immediate neighbor of USA. And even if USA does have a stake in Indo-Pacific, then it does not have a direct stake in Indo-Pacific. Alright, so in 1950s, if we go back in history, then in 1950s, India did engage with China and it did support its international recognition also. In 1970s, we know that how China had shifted its inclination towards countries like USA, and India was more inclined towards Russia, because if we remember that during the prime ministership of Mrs. Indira Gandhi, we had signed a friendship treaty with Russia. The then Soviet Union, during the Bangladesh Liberation War of 1971, and ever since then, India and Moscow, New Delhi and Moscow had a peaceful relationship until the changing geopolitics between China and USA, which made China more inclined towards Russia. All right, so now we see that China is more inclined towards Russia, and USA considers both Russia and China as its threat. However, Russia is an immediate threat which does not follow any international order according to USA, and China is a long-term threat for USA, which seeks to replace it as a dominant power in Asia and as well as around the world. In the 21st century, India started to deepen its relationship with USA. We had signed all the important pacts that USA signs with its strategic countries, whether it is BECA, whether it is Limau, etc., etc. So we have signed all the strategic agreements with USA, and Quad is implicitly talks about that how India and USA are going to be a major stakeholder in Indo-Pacific. All right. So far we saw that how India's engagement with China and other countries changed. So what do we conclude here? We conclude that geopolitics are never the same. Therefore, India has shifted to what we know as the Enlightenment self-interest policy. That means we will seek to bring forth our interest, and we are going to engage with other countries depending upon how our interests or our objectives are being fulfilled. It is not easy to make a concrete and a converging policy when it comes to the international relationships, because they are always changing. And the current churn in Asia does provide India and Washington an historic opportunity to build on the new convergence of the trade, technology, and geopolitics. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching Tarun IAS. Have a nice day.